Welcome to Standing in the Sunlight with Cynthia Rose. We are all on an ever-unfolding unique journey. Join Cynthia Rose as she begins her unique perspective to all that is meaningful. Topics and personalities that support your path, bringing inspiration and passion and heart-centered ways to live a more fulfilling life. A down-to-earth and uplifting sharing of what it means to be spiritual, creative, and living life to the fullest by standing in the sunlight. Born an intuitive medium, Cynthia Rose is also an ordained minister, singer, astrologer, educator, and writer. She has studied the intuitive and healing arts for over 40 years. Rise up and stand in your sunlight now with Cynthia Rose.
Well, hello. It's good afternoon for me, possibly good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I'm Cynthia Rose McCaw. I'm so happy to be here with you. I am going to mention a couple of ways you can connect with me. If you're on Facebook, you can find me under Cynthia Rose Medium. And we also have a Cynthia Rose Medium group page. If you want to interact with Brendan, he always monitors it during the show. Brendan is my husband. He handles a lot of what goes on. And so thank you for that, dear. And I never say that to him, I realized, but I'm so grateful to have him. He is definitely a part of this. So I'm also have a new YouTube page under Cynthia Rose Medium. You can find me under that name on Instagram and Twitter. So there's lots of ways to connect. You can also go to cynthiarosemedium.com. And without further ado, today we're going to talk about death, grief, and loss. These are experiences we will all have. And it is something that I have had people ask me to speak about for a while. It comes up. Well, this is that show. It's not easy going through these life passages. And there can be some things that can be helpful to know when going through the loss of a loved one, grief, or the loss. And a loss can be the loss of a loved one or loved ones. And it can also feel the same way if we have lost a career. Maybe we've left a career that we've loved. Maybe we left a career we didn't love. These are loss. Any major change can feel like a loss. We can have loss of someone who is in our life and they're no longer in our life, and that can feel the same way. So I hope today that anything I say can either inspire you, console you, or help you in some way. I've said my prayers to allow anything to come through that can be helpful. If you are listening later, welcome. If you wish to call in, you can always call me at 1-202-570-7057. So I hope that something is helpful, and please, you just take in what fits for you. Trust what fits. If you don't agree with something, then just let it be. So, it's what I share today is not because I'm schooled in psychology or because I'm a grief expert in psychology. I'm sharing what I know, having lived through different types of losses, grief, and deaths. I've lost family members many different ways. And the interesting thing about grief is I remember losing someone very quickly and thinking if I'd only had a chance to say goodbye. And you might be thinking, wait, aren't you a medium? Mediums always say that there are no goodbyes. Well, that's true, but we're on this earth plane. And while I still communicate with my loved ones and honor them, we still miss their earthly presence. Sure we do. So I remember thinking with one loss, well, if I had just had a chance to say goodbye. That seemed like that was the hard part of it. Until I experienced what I call the long goodbye, someone passing slowly. And that was just as hard. So I think our minds like to have reasons as to why we're feeling what we're feeling. But the truth is, it's just hard. They're just all hard. And, sometimes our loss can seemingly happen before they pass. If you have someone, the experience of having someone who has dementia or doesn't recognize you anymore, calls you by a different name, well, that can feel pretty hurtful, even though we understand they're going through something. For them to call us by another name, not know who we are, all of a sudden remember there's somebody, they're remembering you as someone they were mad at. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of variables. Loss is loss is loss. They're all hard. Suicide is another difficult way of losing someone. Suicide often can bring a sense of guilt, wishing you could have helped them, wishing you could have done something, wishing you would have known. I have experienced those. I know my own mother we lived through a family friend with this experience as well. They're just all different. And so all of these things are difficult to live through. And we'll talk about some of the things that go on in a loss. I won't be saying a lot about the loss of a child. That is a very unique. All loss has commonalities, but the loss of a child is not something I've experienced, although I've spoken to lots of children in spirit. And that I have asked a good friend of mine, who I hope to have on the show, to talk about a loss of a child. And I think that it becomes almost imperative, and this is something that was that I asked her about. She agreed with me. So coping with that, it seems that those that cope the easiest with the loss of a child is that they do build a bridge to the spirit world, and they also have to grieve. Both of those were helpful. So if you're going through any of these types of losses today, then my heart goes out to you. Be gentle with yourself. I may say that again, because it can just be difficult. And in our society, in the Western society, this can be different. Now, when I experienced loss, where it came quick, and I was in a time when you didn't speak about the loss of a loved one. I mean, you didn't speak of death, or loss, and you certainly didn't say anything that wasn't almost like making them in some angelic form. There was a saying, we don't speak ill of the dead, which is pretty hard to process what's going on if you can't speak. And I experienced this. Some cultures remember and celebrate their ancestors. And I think this can be healthy for a couple of reasons, because it gives time or voice to the fact that we miss them and that we can remember them, and we can still earthly know we wish they're there, and it's very, very important. So, it was helpful for me to understand that many people in my life couldn't handle loss when I went through it. Some people have a hard time grieving. I think that grieving is something we all have to learn. I hope I give you some ideas or ways to work through. And if you need support, then please get the appropriate support that you need. I had a friend who suffered a great loss, and she never grieved. She just tried to bury it. And when it got too much, she would drink herself into oblivion, and she wouldn't remember anything. But one thing I remember when I was around her, when I saw that, is that she had a sense of guilt. She didn't know how to process it. She would share with me only when she was drunk. She couldn't go there when she was sober because she felt overwhelmed. And I think a lot of people do feel overwhelmed, and processing it consciously is obviously a lot easier when we can be conscious about the pain we feel. And, I can remember trying to talk to my family about the loss of my mom, and it was near impossible. We were all grieving differently. And my friend went through this. Her family didn't talk about it, didn't acknowledge it. And sometimes when tragedies happen in families, everybody is going through their own experience, and they just can't be there for each other. And sometimes we're lucky enough to have a family where we do it together. It is no right or wrong. It's just what happens. So for me, my experience in losing my mom, I felt like my mom was with me in spirit. She was trying to let others know she was around. And some of my family accepted that, and some didn't. I'm grateful that she came to me. I had to learn to trust and listen to my mom. And that being said, knowing they're around and feeling connected with spirit is incredibly healing, and we still may need to grieve. And, grief is a palpable feeling. If I have someone in my office or on the phone in a reading and they're holding grief of many years, the grief feels kind of frozen. I so wish I could help them to let it flow, but I know that I'm not in charge. I know they are, and I do my best to bring through a mediumship reading, hoping that it will help them in some way. But it's not a replacement for the process of missing someone here and going through the grieving process. It is an and. That being said, many people have said they feel better. You can have a sense. I've actually seen someone look younger and lighter in front of me through a reading. And that was quite eye-opening for me to see and feel how much lighter they got. That was a real eye-opening experience. I had my eyes closed, and every time I opened my eyes, this person looked lighter and younger, and it was like they came back to me and said, I'm a different person. That person let the healing happen. That was not me. That was me being present, holding the space for them, bringing the information, and that information, they allowed themselves to bring healing through to themselves. So that being said, also, if you know someone is grieving and you don't understand it, then just know you don't. Because judging them for the way they're grieving, that doesn't help anyone. And trying to get them to think positive or bury what they're feeling isn't really going to help either. In this society, we often reward the acceptable feelings, whatever those are. And I'm one who honors all feelings. We don't have to become a feeling as our identity, but to ignore them, well, that can create issues. So I would say grief is like finding a bunch of weeds in your yard that show up all at once, and it can feel overwhelming, like you'll never get to the bottom of it. or a pile of papers, or looking at all the stuff they left behind, that can feel overwhelming. But here's the great thing. When we leave here, we leave all that stuff behind. We can leave it all behind. And then you feel like time goes on, you may have been processing, you may feel like you've got your weeds or your papers under control, and hear that word control. Then you go for a while, and there's no weeds, no big piles of paper. And then, bam, a bunch of new weeds, a bunch of new grief. And that's because the deeper we love, the deeper we grieve. And if I could say only one sentence, it would be to find a healthy way to grieve. Don't hold it there and bury it, because you will feel it at some level physically. You will. And grief, I think, is an earthly experience, and a lot of times we benefit from a physical outlet to be able to express it. So I went to grief counseling when I lost my mom, even though I felt her with me. It was overwhelming to be a young mom with no mom, looking for a dad, looking after a dad who was dying. I was encouraged to exercise regularly to help with the depressing feeling or the stagnant feeling. And I think that exercise is helpful because it creates endorphins that we need so much when we're feeling depressed. Did I feel like going to the gym? No, absolutely not. And it worked for a while. It helped with part of my processing until I was injured and I couldn't exercise. Then there was a whole other level of grieving to deal with. So, I understand now that I wasn't burying my feelings. I was dealing with grief the best way I knew how, and it was still hard. And it really can be helpful to know that there are stages of loss. Do you know Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who really is the one who started to do a lot of study and looked at death and dying, wrote about the stages of loss, and I learned about them. And this is really helpful to know, but also they don't happen like all together. They can happen like 2 at the same time, 3 at the same time, feeling one. So as I say them and I explain these stages, when I learned them, they were a stage. You go through this and you go through this, but it's not the way I experienced it. And I think that has since been updated. The first stage, I'm just going to say them all and then we'll talk about it. The first stage is a sense of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So go grab a glass of water, get ready, and we'll get into this and dig into these different stages. I'm so happy you're here with me. Talk to you in a moment.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On. My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from New Thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Hi, I'm Danica Patrick. Watching my nieces grow, play, and learn is amazing, but not every child gets to be carefree. 1 in 6 kids in the U.S. are hungry. This breaks my heart, and it's something that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and gives it to families in need. To help, visit feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Okay, we're back. So in talking about the first stage, it can come as a shock if it's quick death, or it can come as a feeling of it can't possibly be true, I can't believe it, depending on how you lost someone. But the crux of it is that a part of us, our body mind says this can't be true. It just can't be true, because the body mind sees things in a very permanent way. It doesn't understand loss. It's another part of ourselves, if you will, that understands it, that there is no loss in a sense, but us here on earth, it's a loss because we don't physically see them, perhaps. And I want to mention a loss denial can be a breakup, a job loss, or any big change in our lives. And so when we think that sometimes something happens and we start thinking, this can't possibly have happened, how did it happen? All of a sudden we feel like we're in no man's land, and we have a sense of being out of control, and that is the body mind wanting to maintain control. I mean, it's like, pinch me, is this really happening? And I do think that the body releases chemicals, maybe for the first few weeks, because you can have that experience of being in sort of a fog, or and I think that it can, in some ways, can feel harder after 3 weeks or a month than it is in the beginning, because that denial does bring a release of endorphins or chemicals that I believe have been identified and everything now. But I remember experiencing it. And sometimes we see it coming and we still have a hard time believing it. In the case of parents, there's an added thing that I wanted to say about that before I forget. There's so much I could talk about on this, is that when we lose one parent, we have lost one parent who's a primary influence of some kind in our life, even if they weren't in our life, but they are. That's true. When we lose both parents, we've lost the potentiality in our minds that somebody loves us unconditionally. And, not everyone has that experience with parents, but if we had that experience, then we have that sense that may be gone. Not necessarily true, because there may be people that love us and we don't see it. But we also may have the sense of losing the potential for that. And I think that even then we see it coming, it's still shocking. And that's a form of denial. So one of the other things, want to make sure I get through them all, and I can always sort of go back and how they interweave, is anger as another stage. Anger can be there right along denial at the same time. And sometimes the bigger issue with anger, it's pretty normal to feel like, wait a minute, why have they left me? That brings up a whole bunch of other things we could talk about. But the first thing I want to say is, if we already have a problem expressing anger, we now have two things to deal with. Now we're angry that they've left us, maybe angry at ourselves for being angry, which can then bring a guilty feeling. And if we've not expressed anger in a healthy way previously, our grieving process can be harder because we're having a hard time getting it out. So we grieve many things in life and experience loss. It is perfectly natural to feel angry. I'm making a difference between anger, not rage, anger. If it's a loss of career, that is a grief. We could be angry about it. And sometimes change of any kind, when it feels forced upon us, such as a loss, we are now going, I can't believe this happened, and then we go into anger. And then if we have guilt about being angry, then we go into guilt. And as you can see, there's already a little tripod circle going on. That's already happening. So I'm thinking of something quite funny about how I felt like, I think it was my second or third loss or something, I had learned about anger and healthy ways of expressing anger. And I decided that I would get this book on anger, and because I was now going through, I could feel the anger stage coming up. And this was more around not the loss of a loved one, but just loss. And I bought that book, and I had bought that book 2 years before. So I thought, okay, well, this is just a clear sign I need to dig in and learn about this. And we don't learn about it in school. And I think death and loss definitely brings up that sense of how comfortable are we or not comfortable with anger. Anger is not a problem. It's when we depress the anger or push it down that you put that D in front of it, and it then becomes maybe danger, and we be reactive. And then we're not proactive, we're in reaction. So if you find yourself in that place where you don't understand how to deal with anger, you're not alone, because I think collectively, where do we learn this? Unless you take it upon yourself to learn about anger, then you don't have any training in it. And I think there's very few people that understand. There's a lot of people that go through life not being angry because it's not acceptable, and that anger can become an inner depression, which is really hard to process if we don't know that's going on. Is often anger is depression inward. Now, I'm jumping to another stage naturally, even though there's another stage, I say they don't go in any order. Depression, we may bounce back between anger and depression. We may go through anger and depression, and back and forth, denial, anger, depression, circling around. And if we don't have a healthy understanding of expressing ourselves, then we have denial, anger, and depression, and guilt all circling around. And then there's also another stage that comes in there. It's almost like our body mind is bargaining. Well, what if I did this? It's almost like we want to bring them back. We want to make a difference in some way. And a lot of those what ifs can come in. In the end, we want to get to the place where we can accept that this is what's happened. And that's by doing our personal work about this. And that is a completely personal way to get there. And some cases it's a lot harder than others. I listened to a man speak about forgiving a young boy who killed his young boy. Wow, what a tough one that is. And he said that it was freeing. He said he's actually helping and has helped to shape this young man's life for the better. But the anger and the hatred he had before was destroying him. So his son is killed, and he is now feeling like his life is destroyed and a young man's life is destroyed. He's in prison. And he went through a process. I can't think of the name of the book right now, but he wrote a book about it. He chose to forgive that young man. That young man will live with what he did for the rest of his life. And he's made every effort to be a good man. It was one of those cases where he was accepted into a gang. He had tragedy, the young boy had tragedy in his life. He was in a gang. And he has since grown a lot. He's not asking to be let out of jail or anything. He's just making a difference. Boy, that's a tough one. And you may have heard of Immaculate Libagiza, who talked about forgiving living members of a tribe who killed her whole family. That was the war between the Tutsis and the, oh no, my mind is going blank now on this. Sorry on that. My mind is going blank. In Africa. So she talked about going to a jail. So she had played with kids growing up, and when the ethnic cleansing was happening, she went and she hid, I think, 19 days. I spoke about this once before. She hid 19 days in a washroom with other girls, and her life was saved. Their lives were saved, but her whole family was killed. She talked about the importance of the forgiveness for her, and that when she went to the prison to forgive the man who was still a young man, who had been her childhood friend, he just kept weeping. Meanwhile, the guard was just full of hatred for her, that she was even considering forgiving him. And she said, I sat there free and watched the man cry and knew that he was still imprisoned. But she talks about the importance of that. Good book. And if you have a tragic loss like that, it might be helpful to learn and listen to other people who have had that and the journey they've taken. No one said it's easy, but it has been done. And it does come down to being honest as to where we're at. And we can hold on to grudges and stay angry forever, but we are the ones that suffer. This can happen in a family where some, a sibling stays angry at another sibling and their parents are gone. And who's suffering? You are. So no one ever suffers by us staying angry at them. I was attacked when I was younger. And I was really angry, and I thought, well, I'm going to get revenge. It never, ever made me feel better. It's a bottomless pit of destruction. And I had to find my way with that and let go of that. If there's a tragedy or a great loss feeling and you're suffering, then my heart goes out to you. And I know that you can find your way, because I found my way. Life can be beautiful, joyful, and wonderful experience. It really can. No matter how helpless you're feeling, you can find a way. But if you need support, then reach out. Don't give up. If you're feeling so depressed and heavy that you're endangering yourself, or thoughts of endangering yourself, then reach out. There are suicide helplines. There is so many places you can go to. If there's a church you belong to that you feel drawn to, maybe if the circle you're in right now doesn't provide it, then you can find another way. You can always go to a medium for evidence that they are still around or what they want to say, but we still have to do our own work. Because big questions arise when we experience grief. You know, grief or death or loss, it's a part of life and it has much to teach us. And it's so helpful to know what is going on with ourselves and to take time to listen to what we're really feeling and what's deeply going on. You know, I'm sorry if you're grieving this time, but do remember it's a process. We can't say we're going to do it from 3 to 5 on Friday. You've got to be gentle with yourself. You've got to do your best to look after your body, because your body is going to release chemicals that is going to help your mind experience. You know, I'm going to encourage you to eat food that has some vitamins in it that's healthy for you, and allow your body to get the vitamins and minerals it needs. Do you know that if we don't have magnesium in our body, it can create all kinds of problems, all the way to heart problems? So, and a lot of us can be deficient in magnesium, I'm told. Simple fact that we have things like coffee and tea. So, you know, that's an interesting thing. I'm one who's always lived by spirit, the power of my spirit, but I'm in a body. I take care of this body, and it makes a big difference. You know, a type of exercise individual to you and your body consciously. If you can go to the gym and work out, then that can be really helpful. If you can't do that, maybe a daily walk. Maybe you do some type of stretching, yoga, exercise of some kind. There's yoga for people that are 90 years old. So there's all kinds of ways that way. But I want to say doing it consciously, like consciously releasing energies, choosing a focal point. And if we're learning how to love ourselves, it might be, as I make this good meal, I'm taking care of myself. So, and also, you know, some people don't want to hear about grief because it brings up the idea that we're only here for a limited time. So you may have people in your life that don't want to talk about it because they can't handle it. All right, it's time for our break, and we'll be back for the last section, talking about grief, death, and loss. Thank you for being with me. Just a moment.
Free your mind with OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
Tune in to The Practical Intuitive, Mind, Body, Spirit for the Real World with me, host Robin Fritz, Mondays at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 Eastern. I'll cover personal and business intuition, animal communication, mediumship, space clearing, past life regression, shamanic insights, energy healing, soul choice, and more, all to help you tap your own intuitive and healing skills. No ifs, ands, or buts.
The average time a resume spends on an HR manager's desk is 7 seconds, and most of them are tossed aside. Now imagine if one of those resumes belonged to Yasmin, who was
living in a shelter, juggling 3 jobs. I had to be resilient. That's something that you can't teach.
We rely so much on a resume, yet it could never tell the full story of someone who
had to be independent and take initiative. And that's how I handle every project I get.
Discover new ways to develop great talent at gradsoflife.org. Brought to you by Grads of Life and the Ad Council.
Okay, we're back. So, in talking about loss and grief, the thing that I see often is that people may come to my office and they may get or have a reading and they feel so much better. But, you know, my heart goes out to people, the process of going through grieving, because we're not really taught how to grieve in our society. And often it's like, well, just know that they're with you. You know, I knew my mom was with me. I communicated with her. I had evidence that she was with me, and I even put it out to her to come through someone else, and she did. And I've shared about that. I believe I shared that before. But I still had to walk the walk of going through all that came up. And I think the bigger issue here is that when we lose someone, we are now faced with our own mortality in this life. There's also the bigger question, will we carry on? Are we immortal? And that is the beautiful thing of mediumship, is that we realize we don't die. There is no death. And so that is good to know. And in the meantime, how do we get up, go to work, carry on, look after kids, or whatever it is that we do? And we can have a sense of depression because things are rising in us, trying to emerge in us that we may not understand. And in my case, I felt really depressed being a young mom with no mom, and a young mom with no parents. In a time when no one talked about any of this, and if you did, you were only allowed to say certain things. And I certainly didn't enjoy the pity that was put upon me. And let me just talk about that for a moment, because I think one of the hardest things is when we face with someone who's lost someone, there is that, what do I say? Having experienced people knowing better than me, or sort of a sympathetic approach, I'm sorry, and well-meaning, sometimes it can be a feeling like somehow they're in a better place than you are. And while you might say, well, they are, well, you're actually having a deepening of your living experience. See, death brings the call for us to live more meaningful, to live a more full life. And I really think that's why we may have that experience, because we can go through life and everything can be great. A death happens and all of a sudden everything can come into question. And so if we're happy in our work, then that's not a question. If we are happy with our spirit self, not a question. But if we're not, if we have other callings, if we don't know things about ourselves on a deeper level, all of a sudden those are crying out to us. And that can come in the form of depression. And that is, like I say, depression can often be an inward feeling, something, and then we have a decision. Our mind can say, well, this wasn't supposed to happen. It's wrong. But there is no one on this planet that can tell you why everything happens. We could say it happens for a reason, but it's not always helpful for us. Certain losses, we would be like, that just feels harmful. And while I might feel somebody's fine on the other side, my human self might think, wow, I'm sorry. Every time I bring through someone losing a child, I want to call my son and say, hi, I love you, in case I don't get a chance to again. So I think I live with the idea of death every day. I live every day as if it's my last. And I don't think it is, but I'll tell you, I'm more alive and live my life fully and get more meaning out of my life because I don't take for granted being here. You know, this presence is a present. It's a gift. This is our spiritual playground, if you will, for us to create, connect in love and connect in joy. And for whatever reason it is, we're going through sometimes the blocks to that. And how do we get through that? But I know that I sit before you, and I say sit instead of stand because I'm sitting right now. I sit before you more alive, more joyful, more peaceful, and more happy than I was as a young mom with my whole life ahead of me as I go closer to what will be death one day, death of this body. I am in such a beautiful place, much more than when I was younger. And that's because I have embraced my spiritual self for many, many years. And just because I've done it for many years doesn't mean that it's going to take you many years if you have not. There is a time right now for awakening and knowing that we are so much more than the bodies we have and the food we eat. And if you're in that feeling of depression, then you need to decide how to take better care of your body. If you haven't had training on how to take care of yourself, like if you didn't learn it from your mom, or even if you did, maybe if you did learn it, you have to step up and be your own parent in some way and say, I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to do this, because we can become unconscious in a bag of chips, be trying to stuff down a feeling of what it is we don't want to feel. We don't need to become our feelings, but we do want to be honest about what's going on. So depression, that's a really big one. We may feel, what's next? Maybe we've had what is like, we are with a partner and we're not with them anymore. Whether that's death or whether that's leaving someone here, there can be two feelings depending on what the loss is. There can be a feeling of relief and still feeling like you miss something. You can have a relationship with somebody where it feels like a relief when they pass, and we can feel bad about that. But the truth is, there's sometimes really hard to watch someone be ill. And this is where I want to talk about the way we judge ourselves in going through the grieving process is so important to not do that. Or to notice that we are doing that and say, you know what, I don't need to feel guilty about this. I'm going to find a way to not feel guilty and not judge myself. I'm just feeling. Take the Band-Aid off the restriction of what you're feeling and let yourself just feel it. If you need to journal it out, that is a physical way. Some of us only see what's going on by writing. Some of us feel like we need to do something physical to tune into what's going on with us. Some of us like to sit with it slowly, let it seep up. Sometimes people watch movies and things will sort up, but we can also tune in or tune out in that case. The more we choose to be conscious, then we will go through that and we can let it go. But don't let anyone ever tell you that you can't get over something, because you can. But that doesn't mean we won't miss someone. I can still miss the presence of someone here and feel accepting and peaceful that they are gone. But I can remember a husband saying to me, I'm okay with her passing, because he knew she was going to pass. It's her suffering that's so hard. That's a whole part thing. It can feel so good to know they're gone because they're not suffering. And then we can easily feel bad that we feel good that they're not suffering. So I think that really that loss is a awareness of the little circle of the mind and the heart trying to blend together and get the judgments out of the way. And when we lose someone or we have a great loss, we are now invited or inducted into the Hall of Heart. How can we see through our heart? Because there's heart seeing or heart thinking, and there is trying to tell ourselves what we feel is never going to clear anything. It's positive thinking. Well, that's great. That's putting a positive step forth. That can be our intention to do it. But I want to say it's like casting a fishing line and then not worrying about if you catch fish. Just do it anyways. Just go forth. And I also think death teaches us to not live in the past, to live in this present moment. And the more we can live in the present moment, not in the past or not in the future, right now, and there is a strength to that. Is it possible to feel happy about something and still feel sad about missing someone? Absolutely. I think I read somewhere that we can only feel one thing at one time, and that's not the way I feel. I can feel sort of sad about missing someone, they're not here when they first lose them. But then I can also feel very joyous about something. Maybe allow yourself to feel the whole spectrum of your feelings. Because I think that death is really trying to teach us to live. You know, in astrology, there are markers in someone's chart about what this can awaken. You know, in the case of my chart, it was a monumental experience for me in waking up about my abilities and using my abilities. Even though I had them, I was just trying to live life, trying to be grounded, move forward, and it was a redirection, or, you know, how can I share this? You know, if you're going through a type of loss, then I can't stress enough to maybe not spend too much time alone, but give yourself the time alone to be able to hear what's going on with yourself, because we can vacillate from too much time alone or never wanting to be alone because we don't want to acknowledge what's going on. And if you do have that pattern going on, then just acknowledge, oh, I have that pattern. I see that going on. Let me change that, because I know that you can rise above it. I know that we don't have too much time left, and I want to think, what else can I share with you? I would encourage you to maybe write down these stages of guilt, of loss, because if you're carrying guilt about something, then you may take that guilt through stages as well. You know, I think that this is something that's very prominent. You can look at, if you've had an accident, you can go through denial of the accident, I'm fine. You had a job loss, like denial that I'm fine. No, this didn't happen. This is a cycle for life. We go through a denial. We may go through an anger. We may go through a bargaining. Well, maybe this doesn't have to be. Or in the case of a loss or a separation, a breakup, we bargain that maybe we can change what's happened because we want to be in denial of it. They kind of all link in together. We're angry, but then there's depression. We're angry, then there's depression. And then we can feel like we've accepted it and we can go in the circle again. And I'm aware that when I went through, I used to have experience of not being able to move or with pain, and I kind of was watching how I would be like, oh no, I'm fine. I can get up. No, I couldn't. Then I'd be frustrated. Then there'd be bargaining. This can be going on if you have a health condition that's chronic. And there are ways to deal with that. That's a whole other story. But if I could say, just be kind to yourself if you're taking things personally, sometimes we have to look at what's happening in our outer world. If we're taking things personally, and maybe we have some feelings that we don't want to accept about what's going on. And the world is like a mirror for us of everything that's going on with us. It has been a pleasure and an honor to share this with you. I hope some of what I said helps you. And please allow yourself the kindness and the support for the very difficult process of what you're going through with grieving. Because I think in the end, you can find peace and happiness at the other end if you allow yourself. So I would encourage you to find support in a way that's meaningful for you. But also I would say honor your spiritual life. Whatever that means for you, how you can explore that. Who are you as a spiritual being? And nurture that, because you are so much more than these flesh and bones. Both are important to grieve, but to nurture your spiritual self. So have a good week, and I will look forward to talking with you next week. Much love to you.